All right. Welcome to the Buff Show. Today we're going to discover.
We're going to discover?
No,
what are we going to discover?
We're going to discuss earnest money. We don't need to edit that out.
That's good.
That was good. So, okay, I got Mr. Ben Larson. This is just, we wanted to do a podcast that goes into kind of the nitty gritty details of earnest money, what it is, why we use it, how buyers should look at it, how sellers should look at it, and everything in between.
Perfect.
So, Ben, do you want to give like your expert opinion on what earnest money is?
Expert opinion on what earnest money is. So earnest money is basically a promise to, if we get to a certain point, how do I say this? Basically, it is a remedy if you drop out of your contract past your deadline for the seller to take or use to fix any damages that may occurred from you dropping out too late in the contract.
Yeah. Basically liquid damages if anybody breaches.
So, and that stuff would cover like if you've paid a mover or you've signed a lease and can't get out of it and break. So earnest money is basically a remedy, a pre-lawsuit settlement.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I would say it shows like how serious the buyer is and as well as the seller. Like I don't think people realize, but earnest money goes both ways. So if a buyer breaches a contract, they go past all their deadlines, then that earnest money is available to the seller. However, if a seller says, hey, I don't want to sell anymore, pulls the plug on the deal, the buyer has access to the equal amount of whatever the earnest money is that the buyer submitted. So say it's $5,000, $10,000, $20,000, or whatever it is. Do you have an amount that you typically see on deals?
I have an amount that just in the market and people like seeing on contracts, anything under like $700,000-800,000, I have at $5,000.
Gotcha.
Anything over that, I try to bump it up to 10.
Yeah.
However, we also use that if we're in a multiple offer situation or we're really wanting some favorable terms somewhere else and we're okay to put that earnest money down, then we'll use that to sweeten deals. So it's also a negotiation tool as well.
And it's all negotiable. I typically say you're around 1% of whatever the purchase price is. On $1 million, $10,000. $500,000, $5,000. I rarely like to go below $5,000 right now.
$5,000, yeah, $5,000 is kind of like you're cut and dry because if somebody starts moving half of their stuff out, I mean, $5,000 doesn't make it a long way anymore.
No, it really doesn't. So, and it's there to protect the buyer and seller. So if you're the buyer and you get a deal under contract, say you had $5,000 earnest money, how long do you have that to get that turned in?
You have 4 days to get that to your agent from the time you go under contract.
Yeah, after. Yeah. And then that earnest money can be either held in a brokerage trust account, which we prefer, or a title company.
Why do we prefer that?
Yeah.
For example, if we're your buyer's agent and we collect your earnest money, if we end up dropping out or some reason that earnest money needs to be refunded to you, there's no questions. If we know we've done right, we will take that money out of our trust account and get it right back to you.
Yeah.
You put it into a title company, and some are worse than others, will not release that no matter what the contract says until they have accepted signatures from both sides.
Right. Which whenever there's a dispute over earnest money, typically there's probably going to be one party that's going to be like, nah, I just won't sign that paper and I'll cause this other party grief. Whether you're the buyer or seller, if you're the buyer and you put $50,000 down and the deal blows up and you want your money back, but the seller won't sign it to get the release of $50,000, then you're kind of like SOL. Right. Versus if it's in the brokerage trust account, we can just disperse it according to the contract.
Yep.
Contract's pretty cut and dry, and we will follow it accordingly without needing the authorization of the other party. Title companies, they need both signatures in most cases. So,
how many times have you seen earnest money get lost?
A few times, probably it's under 5, but 2 to 3 times that I can think of.
I've only seen, and what we didn't lose, we had a buyer buying a lot on our side.
Yeah.
That lost theirs, and that's the only time I've ever seen it. And it was after like 9 extensions and, worked with them for years, basically.
I've had 2 buyers say, I don't want to proceed after dates. And I'm like, well, your earnest, like, hopefully the sellers take their earnest money because there's a few remedies, right? They can take earnest money or they could sue for damages or performance.
Yep.
And so there's really those three options. Same with a buyer. They can pursue, if a seller breaches, they can pursue that earnest money, or they can sue for damages or performance as well. So just keep that in mind. It's always good to have a good amount. Like, I'm in the process of buying a house right now. If I had $1,000, like that $1,000 earnest money, if the seller wanted to breach or got a better offer, it'd be very easy for them to just be like, hey,
Yeah, screw it. I'll pay you the $1,000.
yeah, I'll pay you the $1,000 and I'm going to go with this other
Right.
offer. Right.
Which I like that. But usually if a seller breaches, so that we talk about suing to perform, and we were taking some classes and had an attorney, and he was saying usually a judge will not rule for a buyer to have to buy, but will award damages. However, more often than not, a judge will rule a seller has to sell. Because if a buyer can't buy, he can't buy. You can't
Right.
force someone to do what they can't do.
Right.
But if a seller tries to back out, a judge will most likely force them to perform on the sale,
Right.
to get rid of their home,
Yeah.
because they can do that.
Yeah.
So keep that in mind. So even though it is $1,000, if you get a better deal and want to drop out, you can see if they'll take it.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess here's one thing I haven't talked. Once they take that, once you send them the check, is it cut and dry, or do they have a time frame
No,
where they can come back?
It's cut and dry.
It's
Like
cut and dry the second
they've accepted
accepted.
it. Yeah.
And that's the other thing. You can accept one remedy. You can't
Right.
take earnest and sue.
Right.
So if you really want the house, hey, we want to perform. So
Right. Keep your earnest
Yep.
money. And that's what I tell when my clients were backing out. I'm like, we better hope they
Yep.
take your earnest money, right?
Right.
Because if they don't take it, that means they're coming after either more, or they're going to try and force you to
Mhm.
perform.
And that more is going to hurt worse, I think, than forcing you to perform, because if you perform, you buy the house, you can resell it, get out of it. I mean, if you get sued for damages, yeah, it's not going to be the whole purchase of the house, but you get nothing for nothing.
Yeah.
Right?
And let's talk about if you're a seller, because this is most cases we're looking out for the sellers, because they're going to have the most liability and risk and exposure if a buyer doesn't perform. Because let's use a few scenarios. So scenario one, I have a seller selling a house in Ogden and they're relocating out of state. As they're relocating out of state, they have to get movers. We just had a client get a moving quote for $20,000 to move their stuff. Okay. So they got $20,000 in moving expenses. And then they have to find a place where they're going to go, which is likely they're going to have to sign a lease. We'll say the lease is $2,000 a month, conservatively. Right. And so they make all these commitments, move out of their house in hopes that the buyer is going to execute the contract. And let's say day before closing, the buyer says, I don't think I want to do this anymore. I'm out. And the seller's like moving companies, they charge you up front yeah. or half up front and then half the day of. So she would be on the line for at least $10,000, not to mention the rental contract that which
will probably be
she had to break, right?
Yeah.
So we're talking right there, an easy amount of, 10 plus, 15,000. Yeah.
Yeah. If you have to pay out a lease. Yeah.
So you have to make sure as a seller that you're taking into consideration all those things. And there are the horror stories where sellers have moved all the way out. They're out and the buyer doesn't perform. And it's like, okay, well, even if you didn't move across states, what amount gets you back into the house so that you can continue living normal, right?
Right.
Or if let's say a seller was to breach today, or a buyer was to breach on a deal today, and it's September 16th, and
you don't sell for 3 months.
And we don't sell for 3 or 4 months because now we're heading into winter, and now they have snow removal and the house is vacant, and it's just a snowball effect. So not to paint all these horror stories, but to make your mind think like, okay, what is a good amount of earnest money that I should be accepting on the contract of my house as a seller? And same as a buyer. Like if you're a buyer and you're selling your house and the seller breaches and doesn't want to move, like maybe your house is already sold and you have to move in there, right?
Yeah.
You have no place to go. And if they won't sell, then you have to find an Airbnb or a rental or whatever.
Or hotel, something.
Yeah. So it's not always, sometimes buyers are like, yeah, we only got they accepted only $3,000 earnest money. And you're like, okay, well that's great. But realize that $3,000 is not that much protection, right?
Right.
The bigger the earnest money deposit, I would say like the more solid this contract is as a whole, because that's like the money tying it. It's the glue.
It's the glue, and it's also the stick at the end, right?
Right.
It's the stick that you get hit with if you don't perform.
Yeah.
And it could be even a bigger stick, but what's nice about earnest money is it's a stick already loaded. You grab it and you hit them with it. You have that option.
Yeah.
If you choose not to use the stick, well, then you have to play the courts game, and yes, suing and certain things could come to win, but you still have to put money out to play the sue game or the litigation game.
Yeah.
But the stick's preloaded. I like that.
Yeah. So hopefully that's a good overview of what earnest money is, how it's used, how to kind of think about it. And I hope this helped. It is a very important piece to the contract that I feel like is often under discussed and under analyzed when stepping into the deal. So,
and I think sellers need to discuss it more than even buyers. Yes, they're paying it.
Yeah.
But sellers need to discuss, hey, what are we willing to accept? Or if you have a huge moving expense, hey, let them know we'll go under contract, but
we need X.
Yeah, we need X.
And there are deals where, like, we had one recently, and my seller is moving, and that was her moving bid. And the buyer was only, like, we even countered the earnest money, and the most they were willing to do was $3,000. But we didn't have any other options. Yeah. So I was like, sometimes beggars can't be choosers, right? Yep. And we asked, and they countered. Like, we kept countering that, and that was the most. So I was like, are you okay with this risk? It is a risk.
It is a risk. Can you mitigate by pushing times out?
Yeah. And she mitigated by going to movers and saying, hey, I can't sign your contract if you're going to make me pay half of the deposit up front, like, or 2 weeks out. My portion will be non-refundable when my house closes, basically. And the mover was like, okay. And so that's how she kind of mitigated that risk. So, and then on her rental side, we found a rental property. Well, not we, but she found a rental property in another state that was month to month. And so
perfect.
The biggest risk she had was 1 month's rent, right?
Right.
And so there's ways to get around it. You just have to think and kind of think outside the box to protect yourself there.
Right.
So anyways, hopefully this was helpful. And if you guys have any other questions, reach out. Happy to help you out.
See you later.